Please do know we are doing this webinar as of right now. Give me one moment, please. I'm currently having some internet issues. Great. Okay, so to give some background about this series, as I mentioned, this is our fifth webinar. The Center for Constitutional Rights has been doing this webinar series, FOIA and Fight Back, to cover how open records and Open Records Act laws throughout the South can be useful tools for local advocacy, media, litigation, and movement organizing campaigns. Today, our staff will share strategies in putting together Mississippi open records requests as part of your advocacy work, using case examples and teaching the basics of drafting requests. We'll also share more about CCR's FOIA resources and upcoming trainings. Before we get started, I want to give some background about the Open Records Project, as well as the Center for Constitutional Rights Southern Office. And I totally forgot to introduce myself. My name is Emily Early, and I am the Associate Director of CCR's Southern Office, otherwise known as CCR South. CCR's Open Records Project utilizes public records requests as an important tool for our social justice work in support of communities and our movement partners. Our unique approach really aims to support our allies' vision for accountability and social change in our legal and advocacy work. And in partnership with the Open Records Project, our Southern Regional Office uh, recently launched a few years ago after being dormant for a number of years. And our Southern Office partners with Southern based grassroots movements, human rights defenders, and community organizations fighting to transform material conditions, dismantle systems of oppression, and advance visions of collective liberation in the South. And we're very glad to be with you. I'm here chiming in from Atlanta, and Corbin is in Jackson. And we'll forgive Ian for being in California. He's still a part of this Southern team. So I'm going to turn now to give you all an overview of what we intend to cover today. Thank you for the next slide. I'm sorry, and I did not also introduce Alice Wang, who is in our background running the show as stage manager. So thank you so much, Alice, for being here. So today we will cover, as we already mentioned, our introductions. And again, Ian and Corbin will introduce themselves. We'll give a very broad, high-level overview of the Mississippi Open Records Act. Then we'll go through key parts of a records request. Then we will actually get the opportunity to collectively draft a records request together. And of course, throughout this webinar, you all are free to ask questions. We'll do our best to answer them throughout the webinar. However, we would like to reserve questions towards the end of the webinar after we've gone through crafting the request together as an exercise. So now I'm going to turn it over to my colleagues, Ian and Corbin.
Great. Thanks, Emily. Hey everyone, Ian Head, he, him. Great to be here. I am the Open Records project manager at CCR, like Emily mentioned. I don't know, Corbin, do you want to just quickly introduce yourself and then I'll get into this slide if that works?
Sorry, hit the wrong button. Yeah, sure. Hey, I'm Corbin Felder, he, him pronouns. I'm a CCR Justice Fellow, so a young attorney in Jackson, Mississippi. Happy to be here, work on the CCR South team with our colleagues in Georgia and Alabama. But yeah, I appreciate y'all being here.
So I'm just going to kind of do a quick overview of how we think about open records work at CCR. I think maybe it's a little different than the way some other organizations and nonprofits think about open records work. And I will also credit so many of the movement partners and folks we work with, activists, organizers, and others for kind of really kind of challenging me to think about FOIAs and open records work in different ways. I know that I'm sure there's a lot of people on this call who know a whole lot more about the Mississippi Public Records Act than I do. But to kind of go through a couple key bullet points of how we go about a lot of our, not all, but a lot of our open records work, we really think of the process as a potential place for advocacy, not just necessarily when you get records or if you get records. And so one of the first things we do a lot of is press work, whether it's a press release, social media, or other kind of press or media work when we just file the records request itself, if that's strategic for us or for the folks we're working with on the ground. Sometimes you can get journalists and others to cover the filing of the records request, especially if you kind of frame that filing around the idea that you're kind of making a public demand on the government, right? You're raising important questions, you're raising urgent questions about really key issues that are impacting people in Mississippi, in a part of Mississippi, et cetera. Rather than just, hey, I'm looking for some records. And so I think that's been really successful for us, especially when we are going up against an agency that might not be that willing to easily share records. So that's one thing that um, will often do. And with that, obviously, we're connecting with journalists and legislators. So, uh, we will often, if we have any connections with local legislators, we might tell them about the fact that we filed or are about to file a records request, see if they can do anything kind of behind the scenes to kind of push on those agencies if they have those connections. And sometimes our filing of the request can help them in their work pushing on the same issue. So it can kind of feed off each other. Um, Obviously, publishing key documents you get back, I think, is an important piece of the advocacy. You don't have to wait to get all of the documents necessarily before you start releasing things that you might get back. Um, think about kind of how different records you get back or data you get back can help shape the narrative and the campaigns you might be working on if you're, working on an organizing campaign. And think about whether, it's often strategic to have multiple requests that build on each other and using those documents not just for kind of publicity, but for building on new requests, new work, new parts of the movement campaigns, and also thinking about if you get a response that says we don't have anything that you're asking for, and it likely is, say, from other news reports that they do have those. Sometimes a denial or a no answer can be a good point of advocacy too. But thinking about all the kind of points of advocacy along the way before you get the records is often helpful. I don't know, Corbin or Emily, if you want to add anything that I might have missed.
No, I think you hit the nail on the head. That's not just the records you receive, but it can also be the denial. We're not going to sugarcoat that you're going to necessarily have 100% success rate with filing record requests, but there is a lot of organizing and advocacy that could be done even around denials, and trying to push that institution. And if you have a coordinated effort of multiple requesters seeking the same information, you could definitely organize around that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
go for it,
go
Emily.
ahead.
So I think I'm gonna pass it to Corbin for the next slide on kind of breaking down the basics of the Mississippi Public Records Act.
Sure thing. So, in general, the Mississippi Public Records Act, it's a full title of 1983. State law passed in 83 that had the intention of giving access to public records laws under this Sunshine Law, you know, kind of principle. And the point is to access public requests of records of all public bodies of government. So the official citation, if you're interested in statutes, is Mississippi Code Section 2561. And the full language is there and there's multiple subparts. But it's to any government agency um, that exists. So in the state of Mississippi, um, and question of what types of records can you get? Any documents, any type of um, uh, there's a definition of public records as a broad range of materials that's both print and electronic. So that could be emails, it could be if they have books, maps, films, communications. Certain records can be exempt, generally like investigative records. You often run into that issue with law enforcement agencies. Um, but outside of that, the definition of public records is pretty broad. And you could argue also what types of records fall under the public records. Um, and, they can always say certain things are exempt. Um, but in terms of how to submit it, each agency may be different. Um, and under the law, each public body or state agency can adopt its own procedures concerning, how to produce the records and associating costs, time, place, and method of access to its public records. Some agencies have online systems where you can make requests. Others, you need to send in an email. Some you even have to send in a fax or snail mail it. It all depends on which agency you're going to. But for instance, like Mississippi Department of Corrections, they have a online portal where you can make that request. There may be fees associated with the requests, um, and each agency can set their fees, but you can definitely argue it, and you'll see when we go through the exercise um, how you can try to get ahead of some of the exorbitant rates that agencies may try to charge. Agencies may charge fees as a way to chill the request if they don't want to. Um, but the thing is, the law says the fees have to be reasonable, that don't actually exceed the cost of finding and producing those records. Um, and the Mississippi Ethics Commission has some guidance out there about fees and how much should be charged per page. Generally, they're saying you shouldn't be charging more than 15 cents per page if they have to photocopy it, right? If I want to receive a 50-page set of documents, and they're saying we're gonna have to photocopy them, the Ethics Commission advises it shouldn't be that much more than 15 cents per page. But the Mississippi Public Records Act does not specifically name how much they can and cannot charge, but that leaves it that each public entity has a level of discretion of how to charge. And then what to do when agencies delay, deny, and redact. There could be an administrative appeals process, sometimes within each agency, or going to the Mississippi Ethics Commission that could do their own investigation and could try to get the agency to produce the documents. You could even litigate in Chancery Court or possibly Circuit Court here in Mississippi. And you lastly can always apply public pressure. As well and see how that goes. And sometimes the agencies do turn documents over after there is pressure or even threatened action. So I think we will show an example now.
Yeah, I am going to be covering an example that we submitted within the last year. Before we jump to that, we see that there are a few questions in the chat, so we'll answer a couple of them now and then reserve a few those questions for later in the webinar. Um, so let's see. One question is, what strategies have you seen that work in order to challenge claims of an exemption? I know Ian has lots of experience on this, so I will turn to him first, but I'll add that I think sometimes even just being willing to go back and forth with the agency. I think oftentimes a lot of requesters might I don't want to lightly say give up, but right, it takes time to have to engage in correspondence, and you all have so much happening in your everyday lives and work, and so some people may not want to go back and forth and challenge, the agency's failure to cite an accurate exemption or to fully explain how the exemption applies, but it is worth doing that. And so if you submit the request, the agency responds that certain exemptions apply, you know, you should be up to the task to challenge them, or the advice or request or recommendation is to challenge the agency's provision of these exemptions and really ask them why they apply and how, if you disagree with the relevance of those objections, or excuse me, exemptions. And have further correspondence. Sometimes it may even be worth having a phone call with the requesting agency to go over what those exemptions are. And sometimes the agencies may agree. I think that's probably a lot rarer than one would like, but sometimes they may agree. And I think also another strategy, in addition to just battling about the exemptions, is being willing to determine what you may want to give up in your request. Right, ask as broadly as possible from the beginning, but know that you may have to be willing to negotiate when the opposition comes down from the agency. But I'll turn over to Ian to also answer.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with all of that. I think a couple other things I might throw out there, and we've been dealing with this with some recent requests we've done. Uh, I think agencies, my experience in general doing requests kind of all over the country and federally, is that they like to intimidate requesters with exemptions, with overbroad exemptions. And so I think just kind of like Emily was saying, get on the phone or just push back on them a bit. You probably have to do a little bit of not legal research, but just citation of the law back to them. I think a lot of this, it doesn't mean you have to go and have some kind of Westlaw account or access to a lawyer, but just the Mississippi Code, and our explainer has links to different parts of that um as well. Just kind of cite the law back to them and say, you're really kind of using these exemptions kind of broadly. That's typically my experience. Can you explain exactly why this is exempt and why all of these different parts, say, of my request are exempt under this exemption? And sometimes that'll force them to be like, all right, we'll give you a little something here and we'll give you a little something there. And not to ramble too much on about exemptions, but the other thing that at the federal level we do a lot of the time is we argue that there should be segregable, what are called segregable parts, so like factual parts that might be exempted. They might exempt a whole email, but there might be sentences in that email that should not be exempt because they don't have to deal with the actual kind of reason for the exemption. So there's less law in Mississippi around that than in the federal, but sometimes it works to even cite to federal laws around or the federal statute, the Freedom of Information Act, around that stuff. Corbin, you were about to say something.
Oh yeah, no. So like Ian said, sometimes it doesn't have to be totally case law specific. You can go to the statute. That can honestly just be a Google search and you can find the statute on Google, and that 2561(1), and then, the et cetera is going to be the different sections. So for instance, I don't know the number of the Mississippi section off the top of my head, but um, they do have to do a reasonable search. So what all of this means is that there's just a lot of informal back and forth often with the agencies. And you can even say, can you please tell us what search you did? If you're telling me there's no records, if you're telling me there's nothing you can find that you can turn over to me, please tell me, like, what did you do to search for this? Because I believe that these records exist. So there's like the point of actually submitting the record request, and then there is the back and forth that it feels weird because it's an informal process, but the records request is still pending, and this is the kind of step you're trying to take before you have to elevate it. Um, yeah.
Thanks, Corbin and Ian. So yeah, now on to this example of a request that we submitted to the Lexington Police Department last year under Mississippi's Open Records Act. following many of the same steps that Corbin just shared. We were in partnership with a Mississippi based organization seeking to obtain additional information and documents around the reported police brutality and abusive fines and fees practices that the Lexington Police Department had subjected local residents in Lexington, Mississippi to for years. And as we understand, unfortunately, many of these practices have resurfaced since the change in the federal administration. But going back to the request that we submitted last year, again, we asked for records relating to policies and practices in connection with the collection of fines and fees, which, if folks were unable to pay, resulted in them being detained by the Lexington Police Department. And so we submitted a number of requests. We also eventually submitted some document requests, related document requests to the local county sheriff's department, as well as the jail, to understand how many folks had been detained, arrested, and incarcerated for their inability to pay, which under the Constitution is not permitted. And so we engaged in quite a bit of back and forth with the attorney, really making sure that, or excuse me, the city attorney for Lexington, to make sure that the city was fully compliant, the police department was fully compliant with the Mississippi Open Records request that we had submitted. And we actually did an in-person visit to look at some of these records, in particular the jail logs that were at the Lexington Police Department, and took notes as well as pictures of those logs. And so, in addition to our ability to go to the police department to review the records and make these copies, we also received some records, including this police manual, or a staff manual for members of the Lexington County Police Department. We also were told in response to our records request that many records did not exist. And so, again, this is another point on which you often want to push back. And I think Corbin was talking about this earlier, right? What process did you go through to actually search for the records that we've requested? Because oftentimes agencies don't do a robust, fulsome investigation of their records. And so, really holding them accountable, holding those agencies accountable for what processes they're engaging in to respond to your requests is really key. Um, and yeah, I mean, eventually we got, not a huge batch of documents, but a good number of documents that were pretty responsive. I don't think they told us very much that we didn't already know, but the idea was to gather this information as part of potential pre-litigation or other legal advocacy investigation, in partnership with this Mississippi-based organization, to see how we could support them as well as other residents to really learn what policies the police department was applying and using to abuse local residents with. And as I'm sure folks know, right, with the change in administration, there was, a developing, we think, pattern and practice lawsuit that the Department of Justice was likely planning to file. We never could get, confirmation of that, but we suspected as much given other public reports the DOJ had put out. And so we were waiting to see exactly what happened, or what would happen with following the publication of the DOJ report. And then, of course, the election in November 2024 happened, and then a new administration was sworn into office. And so the DOJ, as we understand it, has really backed off from this particular issue in Lexington, unfortunately. So, yeah, moving on to the next slide, but happy to answer any questions about this specific request if there are any.
Awesome. Yeah, please keep the questions coming in the Q&A. We're gonna do a little building of a request. I'm gonna kind of go through some basic steps that we usually take when putting together a request. We've kind of already kind of pre-drafted a request, but I'm gonna share my screen in a second and kind of show kind of my thought process as we put it together. I think before we get to that point, maybe Corbin, if you want to just give an overview of why we chose to put together this specific request in regards to the Capitol Police?
Yeah, so for those folks who are in Mississippi and in the Jackson area particularly, they probably know Capitol Police is a not uncontroversial um, law enforcement agency in the area. In 2023, there was SB 1020 that expanded the Capitol Police jurisdiction. They are a state agency that historically protects and um, patrols the state capital area. They've been expanded into other areas of sorry, I'm also in a hearing right now. It looks like we just adjourned. Um, I'm going to wrap up on that. Sorry about that. But Capitol Police expanded their jurisdiction in part due to a lot of support by right-wing legislators um, into patrolling much of the wealthiest and whitest parts of Jackson. Capitol Police also has had multiple well-publicized incidents of violence against Black folks in the city of Jackson. So we also know that there are a lot of law enforcement agencies that have been cooperating with federal agencies during this administration, during this federal administration. And there is ongoing conversation about cities, particularly Black cities, um, having the National Guard come in. There has been mumbling at both state and federal levels. The governor of Mississippi, Tate Reeves, said that he's not opposed to sending in the National Guard to Jackson to help with crime control, a la what happened in DC. But we also have had the federal government claim that Jackson has operated as a sanctuary city for many years, and they've claimed that was an illegal thing to do. So with those types of conversations going on, we just thought it was timely that Capitol Police may be an agency that maybe folks on this call would like to get some more information from, and that could be a place to submit a public records request to.
And so we're going to use this as an example, but please feel free. We'll have our emails at the end of this presentation to reach out if there are, other things locally that um, you want to strategize on or have questions about. I am down to share my screen now. So let me go ahead and do that. Okay, hold on one second. There we go. And all right. So as I said, I kind of started putting together this request this week after talking to Corbin about what's been going on. As as has been mentioned, I live in LA. I used to live in New York. I am not going to pretend like I know uh, in detail what's happening and been happening in Jackson. So I did a little online research as I would for any request as well. Uh, Besides talking to Corbin, so I read up on a couple things on the kind of recent-ish articles on the Capitol Police, the expansion, everything that Corbin was talking about, the National Guard stuff. This is from, I think, a week ago or so, 10 days ago, this article. Um, and we put together this request, and I'm just going to kind of go through piece by piece real quick. Some of this is going to seem really basic, but it's really important. Corbin, you want to chime in for a second?
Oh, just is there a way to make this full screen? Let's see. Sorry.
Yeah, on my screen, it's full screen, so I'm not sure if how it's
Oh,
looking.
well, I guess, yeah, just the Google Doc is showing, but
Oh,
all
the
good.
Google Doc. Oh, yeah, sure. Let me see if I can do that. Hold on.
Maybe in the view.
You full screen, full screen.
Yeah.
A little bigger?
I-
Okay, cool. Great. So I think obviously we're CCR, so we have our logo at the top. It's I think if you're making this from an organization, it's good to kind of keep things official, put the logo at the top. I do think that uh, while anyone could make a request in Mississippi, technically, a lot of the time I find that for state level requests, uh, organizations that make them from, or at least if there's a couple organizations, if someone from Mississippi or from that state is making the request, it can get answered faster than if a national organization like CCR might make the request. That's not always true, but is often true. And so it's worth thinking if you have partners on the ground, if you're not based in Mississippi, see if you can partner with someone in making the request.
Oh,
Um,
in terms
Whenever
of,
you come up, yeah, go for it.
oh, I might be jumping the gun, but in terms of, sorry about that noise if you're all hearing it. That I forgot to mention earlier, and you'll see it in the guide that the agency does have 7 working days, so business days, to respond. So dates are important, and making a note of the date. Um, they have to respond. It doesn't mean they have to turn over the documents within 7 business days, but they have to say, hey, we are gonna need some more time. And then you can possibly mutually agree to a time. But ultimately, they can, at the 7 day mark, they can say, hey, we need more time. Then they can ask for another 14 days by law. So keeping track of the dates, and now we're talking about up to 21 business days.
Which is still generally faster than a lot of other states and a lot of other things like even the federal FOIA. Um, and that's exactly why it's important to put that date on your request. Seems kind of simple, but it is really important. I will say generally that especially law enforcement agencies, but lots of government agencies, they don't really necessarily want to be transparent. And so they're going to find any little kind of little thing, little weird, oh, we didn't put the date on the request. Oh, they didn't mention this. Not always, but they might find that as an excuse to delay, not respond in time, make an excuse for why they're responding slower, etc. So little kind of basic things can become very important in kind of the back and forth. Um, you see here, I say via online form. I'm going to get to why that is in a second. So I was like, okay, we're making this request to the Capitol Police. I Googled the Capitol Police. Corbin also sent me a link to muckrock.com. I should say 2 websites that I love when it comes to state level requests are muckrock.com. Let's just open that up real quick. They are great and have been around for a bit, and they have a lot of journalists use this site. A lot of people on this call probably already use this site. They host a lot of documents from all over the country, and they host a lot of, you can look at other people's requests, you can file requests. It's really a great site. Another place where I go as a resource, if I really want to kind of get in more of the nitty gritty of a state's law, is the Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press. They have a resource called the Open Government Guide, and it's individual guides for each of the 50 states. So those 2 resources are really, really great. And I was like, all right, let me just go check out the Capitol Police's website. Let me see what they say or how they say I should contact them to make a public records request. So scrolled around here, I can see that they have a lot of different things. They have a records division. I went there, not too much more information. I went down to the bottom. I saw usually it's useful to look for like what's the contact form, etc. Here they have an actual link that says public records requests. I went there and they have a portal. I can see that this portal is actually a portal that I've used in other states, the same software or whatever, to make a request, which I think is generally a good thing. But, and when I click make a request, you can say, I enter the description, etc. I'm going to pause here for a second. I think that it's 2025. There's a lot of stuff is done through web forms, and that's fine. It's really important though, to make sure you have a way, no matter how you're sending the request, uh, to make sure you have some kind of proof that it got to where it's going. So I think whether it's through a web form, through an email, through a snail mail, if you can just do it in a way where you kind of ensure that you have proof that it actually got there, especially if it's an agency that is notoriously untransparent, like a police department or something like that. And then the other thing is, with web forms, I think it's fine to use this form, but don't feel like you need to be limited by this form. There is part of the Mississippi law that if an agency provides a form to submit a request on, you need to use that form. And that in that Lexington request that Emily talked about earlier, I had to resubmit our requests a couple times because I didn't use their official form. But what I basically did was I put those requests as attachments to the Lexington County, whatever sheriff's department or police department form. Here you can see that there's an option to upload supporting documentation. So I would write up my request, and then I might just make this a PDF and submit it as see attached request. So kind of on a logistics standpoint, just don't let any of the agencies kind of intimidate you into, oh, they're only giving me 500 characters to put my request into, etc. Um, uh, you should. I always start with just writing a request on a Word document or however you want, whatever's easiest for you. Back to the actual request. And again, Corbin, chime in here anytime you feel like it.
Yeah. So, one thing I know for people, if it's still kind of early on in their practice of submitting these requests, they think that there's like special language that you have to use. Um, it's a kind of yes and no. Ian and I will talk about why certain pieces of information are there, but this is all language that can be found again from a simple Google search. Um, in the statute, right? In the public records law, of just, and that's the very first sentence, right? Just saying we're doing this pursuant to the public records law. Being able to cite to the statute is helpful for sure. But you should be able to still get records if you say pursuant to the Mississippi Public Records Act. I'm requesting the following records with or without the numbers and the Mississippi Code citation and everything. And then you just kind of go into the plain language of what you want. Um, they can act obtuse, depending on the agency, of saying, you need to clarify this, we're not sure. So sometimes trying to be as direct as possible is actually really helpful, in saying, this is exactly what I'm looking for.
Yeah, exactly. And one part of that I think is to think about, here we say beginning June 1st, 2025, through the processing of this open records request. So basically through to when you get this and actually start searching for records. Good to have a date frame if you don't, or time frame. If you don't put any kind of time frame, they may come back to you, like Corbin said, and say, hey, do you want everything we've ever done? That's going to be too broad. They may use that as a delay mechanism to not get what you're after. And I think as far as framing the actual request, which is right here, we're saying any communications between, like this one, officials, members of the Capitol Police, and members of the Trump administration related to bringing the National Guard to Jackson, Mississippi. You know, uh, that to me is pretty straightforward. Sure, we're not naming all of the different employees at either of those places, but that's fine. We don't know who those employees are. And so I think there's no reason for us to have to go into more detail than that. But if we did necessarily know who some of those employees were, maybe they got quoted in a newspaper somewhere, and we were interested in, say, one of the leadership members of the Capitol Police and how they might have interacted with Trump, we could mention them as well. And we might even cite to one of the news stories on mention where they're quoted from. I think sometimes it's useful to say, to kind of show, hey, we know this person or this organization like the Capitol Police has already spoken about, potentially bringing the National Guard in, or their conversations with Trump people or whoever. Mississippi Today reported on it already, we'll cite to that. That can be useful. But again, you don't need to do that. That's not like an absolute requirement. And we're happy to answer more questions on kind of how we frame this, but this is kind of we didn't want to make too many requests or break this too much down into too many parts. Just see what we get back with this, and maybe we build on it with another request or two. And then the rest of this, kind of to what Corbin was saying, this is pretty boilerplate language. This is stuff that is from other requests we've done. There's a sample request on the Sweet Tea FOIA Basics website that Alice dropped a link to earlier into the chat. And we're happy to, send other past requests language if it's useful. But basically we're kind of reminding the agency what we expect of them. And again, we put some legal sites in here, but you don't need to necessarily do that. It's just, we're kind of saying, okay, exemptions are discretionary. So, kind of to what the person asked earlier in the webinar, we don't need to go back and forth. If like, think about, before you produce to us, do you really need to exempt all this, or give us, what non-exempt material you have? But if you do exempt parts of it, then label those exemptions. Tell us exactly why you're denying those parts of the material or those aspects of the request, right? Tell me why you're denying the aspects of number one versus why you might exempt stuff from our second part of our request, rather than just saying we're exempting it all three of it under this one exemption and that's it, which agencies like to sometimes try and do. And then another thing I want to say about the fees down here is there isn't, so in the Federal Freedom of Information Act, there actually is built into the law the ability to kind of argue for and get what's called a fee waiver, so like a full waiver of fees. And the kind of very basics of that is to say you have no commercial interest in the material you're seeking, and you're doing it for the public good, you're doing it in the public interest. Nonprofits, educational institutions, et cetera, have good kind of, or should have good standing to kind of ask for that under the law and say, hey, we qualify for a fee waiver. And for instance, when it comes to the federal FOIA, CCR pretty much always gets fee waivers on all of our FOIAs that we file. Sometimes they try to deny it, but we will usually win those on appeal, et cetera, et cetera. I kind of try and use that framework in all state level requests, even though only a few states out of the 50 actually have fee waiver built into the law. Mississippi does not, but the fees are discretionary. And so I think it's useful to make an argument and say, look, we're not a big corporation. We're not doing this to find data in order to kind of, use for our advertising strategy. We're doing this for the public good. We're doing this for an urgent issue related to the people of Jackson and the people of Mississippi. And so therefore, we really would ask that you waive the fees or at least give us a discount on fees. And that has worked in a number of states in regards to fees, in my experience. It doesn't always work. I don't know how successful necessarily. On that Lexington request, we did have to pay some fees for some of the documents, and we didn't have to pay some fees on some of the other documents. So I think it can kind of go, it's part of that back and forth conversation that Emily mentioned earlier. I'm going to stop there. I don't know, Corbin, if you want to add anything that I'm forgetting here.
Oh no. Yeah, just main thing is this paragraph here, second from the bottom. You can sometimes say, hey, the very last line, if your budget is $50, $100, you can just name it and say, hey, don't complete this request. Reach back out to me if you think it's going to cost over this much money, and let's talk. That's why I say that the main thing with the Public Records Act, it's formal and it's informal at the same time. There's a lot of discretion from all these public agencies. So you make the formal request, you get that on paper, and then there's a lot of back and forth often. And that is one of the things that you can do, that being what Ian's highlighted, to affirmatively protect yourself from getting a $600, $700 bill and them saying, well, you asked for it.
Yep, exactly, exactly. And so again, please feel free to copy any of this language. It's pretty standard. And the last thing I'll say before I stop sharing my screen is, again, this is very basic stuff, but it's you want to make it clear where they can contact you, and how you want to be contacted. I think sometimes, especially when we're doing this with a lot of partners, we might put a lot of names and maybe a couple different addresses at the end of our request. Um, Unfortunately, that can sometimes confuse the people responsible for responding to these requests, and they might send one response to one person and another person. We've had instances where responses went to someone who no longer worked at our organization anymore. And so I think you just want to be really clear about where to send that stuff so that as soon as they send it, you can get whether it's documents that they produce to you or whether it's a denial of your request or whatever, something in between. So um, I'm gonna stop sharing if I can figure out. There we go.
So I think we are now at the point in our programming to answer any remaining questions from any of you all. There's one more question that remains pending in the Q&A box, where someone has asked, in connection with the Lexington Police Department open records request, did we do a simultaneous FOIA request to the DOJ? And we did not at that time. The organization we were working with was considering submitting a federal public records request, but I'm not sure of the actual status of that request or whether it was ever submitted. But we ourselves did not submit one. But that always is a great idea to, hit multiple agencies with requests at the same time because their answers could be inconsistent. So, you could use one agency's answer to challenge, an answer coming from another agency, or the answers may even just supplement one another in terms of being able to get, documents that address a number of concerns that you're looking to investigate, which is always wise because while you may be trying to ultimately form a campaign against a particular agency or one agency, those agencies often are working in concert with other agencies. So there's a likelihood that multiple agencies, entities, officers of the public could have relevant documents within their custody. So I
So,
don't. Oh, I'm
oh,
sorry. Go ahead, Ian.
oh, this was just me.
Oh, my bad,
I
Corbin.
was going to just chime in. Yeah. So that question was specific about uh the Lexington Police Office, police department that was being investigated by the federal DOJ, right? So the question of using federal FOIA to get that. One thing I do want to say, courts don't fall under that, right? So when we think about, oh, was there a court case connected to this agency's practices? You unfortunately can't, right? DOJ has an investigation. You could try to FOIA it, but if it was simply this agency was involved in some litigation, you cannot try to submit a records request or FOIA to the court, but there are, depending on what court system, you could try to see if the files are publicly available. That wouldn't be a request. It'll probably be going down to the clerk's office and trying to pull the file. So I just want to make that clear because a lot of times agencies and, just how our legal system works, there could be a federal investigation into a local agency. There can be cooperative agreements between local agencies, between police, sheriff's departments, between federal agencies in these offices, and then you could even have courts playing some type of oversight role.
Yep, agree with all of that. And real quick, I'll just chime in to say, actually, Emily, you covered this. Just that Emily's point about playing agencies off each other. That's just we've definitely done that. So I think it's a great suggestion to play feds off of state, other agents, state agencies, state agencies. You never know who is sharing and who has what.
Thanks, Ian, and thanks, Corbin. Well, we don't see any remaining questions in the Q&A box. So with that, I do want to thank you all for attending our fifth and final FOIA and Fight Back webinar. Again, big thanks to my co-presenters, Ian and Corbin, and to Alice in the background, who's been running things and making this whole thing happen, not just for today, but for this entire series. We don't have any other webinars to flag right now, given this is our final one in the series, but please do look out for additional information, likely for 2026, as we will do additional webinars, just likely not this calendar year, but we will have additional resources on our website that will certainly come out this calendar year. So be on the lookout for those, sign up for CCR's newsletter if you're not already signed up. And please do reach out to any of us with questions. If there's a question that comes to you after this webinar ends, that's totally fine. We want to be a resource for you. We are a resource for you. So please do reach out to any of us at the email addresses flagged on the screen. And we're happy to even workshop any individual requests that you all would like to submit and to support you in any future advocacy around those requests. So I think with that,
I have one thing to add. I'm seeing something in a note that I just want to touch on very quickly. That
sure.
for people, there was a question in a previous session about particularities for doing records requests for carceral settings, prisons, and jails. And sometimes, particularly if you are requesting individuals' records, they are treated as public records. So you can make a records request, but sometimes you will have to get a authorization form from the person, right? If you're advocating on behalf of an incarcerated person, you should have them sign a release of information form and then submit that as well. That's one thing when you are, right? They are incarcerated in a public institution. They are, at the whim of the state, or the county or whatever the system is that's holding them. But in certain cases, when you're asking about individualized records, it is a good practice to have a release form from that person you're advocating for too. Sorry to jump in, Emily. Did just want to mention that before we conclude.
No worries. You came in right at the exact moment because I needed to respond to my kid's babysitter. So with that, we want to conclude and again encourage folks to please reach out. Thank you again, and I hope you all take care.